It all started on a quiet November night in 2027, at a radio telescope nestled deep in the hills of West Virginia. The place was usually calm, just scientists, engineers, and the steady hum of machines listening to the whispers of space. But that night something changed. One of the junior technicians noticed a signal that didn't belong. It wasn't static, it wasn't interference from a satellite, and it sure wasn't a glitch. It pulsed, rhythmically, deliberately, like someone was tapping out a message in the dark. At first, no one wanted to believe it. They checked the equipment twice, then 3 times. They compared it to known cosmic sources, pulsars, quasars, solar flares, but nothing matched. This signal was too clean, too structured. After a week of sleepless nights and hushed conference calls with observatories around the world, the team finally admitted what they'd all been thinking. This was artificial. And it wasn't from Earth. The signal came from the direction of Vega, a bright star about 25 light-years away. That's close in cosmic terms, close enough that if someone there sent a message today, we'd get it in just a couple of decades. But this message? It had been traveling for 45 years. It was old. And it was urgent. When the data was shared with top scientists and intelligence agencies, things moved fast. Quietly, but fast. Within days, the United Nations called a closed-door meeting. No press, no leaks. Just a room full of people trying to decide if humanity should answer a call from the stars. Some argued it was a trap. Others said it could be the greatest moment in human history. But everyone agreed on one thing: this wasn't random noise. Someone or something was asking for help. Months passed. Teams worked in secret, using supercomputers to decode the patterns hidden in the signal. Slowly, a message emerged. Not in English or any human language, but in math, the one language the universe seems to understand. Embedded in the pulses were coordinates, chemical formulas, and a repeating phrase that, when translated, read, "We are under siege. Send aid. They are coming." The senders called themselves the Concord. From what scientists could piece together, they weren't a single species, but a group of civilizations that had banded together across star systems. And they were losing a war. People back on Earth didn't know any of this, not yet. Life went on as usual. Kids went to school, farmers tended their fields, and city lights flickered on at dusk. But behind the scenes, governments were preparing. Emergency protocols that had only existed in theory were dusted off. Military leaders ran simulations. Scientists debated whether replying would be an act of courage or a death sentence. Still, the idea of not answering felt wrong. If someone was drowning in the dark and reached out, wouldn't you throw them a rope? Even if you didn't know who they were? By early 2028, the decision was made. Humanity would respond. Not with weapons or demands, but with a simple message of solidarity. We hear you. We stand ready. The reply was sent using the world's most powerful radio telescopes, all aimed at the same patch of sky near Vega. It took hours to transmit, and when it was done, there was a strange silence in the control rooms, not just from the machines, but from the people. They had just shouted into the void, and now they had to wait. And hope. But space doesn't work on human time. Signals crawl across the stars at the speed of light, which feels fast until you're waiting for an answer from another world. Days turned into weeks. Nothing came back. Doubt crept in. Maybe it was all a mistake. Maybe the signal was a natural fluke after all. Then, just 18 hours after Earth's reply went out, something changed. A new signal appeared, not from Vega, but from the edge of our own solar system, near the icy shell of the Oort cloud. This one wasn't a message. It was a pulse, sharp, powerful, and laced with energy signatures no human instrument had ever recorded. It locked onto Earth's transmission like a homing beacon. Within minutes, every deep space tracking station lit up. Something was moving toward us. Fast. People on the ground still didn't know. They were watching the news, arguing online, planning weekend trips. But high above the planet, satellites began picking up distortions in space-time itself. Tiny ripples like the fabric of reality was being stretched. Then, without warning, a ship appeared. Not in orbit. Not near the moon. Right there. Hanging silently over the Pacific as if it had always been there and we'd just failed to notice. It was sleek, smooth, and blacker than space itself, reflecting no light. No engines fired. No comms were sent. It just waited. Panic erupted in command centers worldwide. Fighter jets scrambled. Nuclear submarines went to high alert. But before anyone could react, a second signal arrived. Calm, clear, and unmistakably intelligent. This time it came from the ship. "We are conquered," it said, translated through layers of code and AI. "You answered our call. We thank you. But danger follows. They have traced your signal. Prepare." The message ended there. No threats, no demands. Just a warning. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't alone, and it wasn't safe. Scientists later realized the terrible truth. By replying, Earth hadn't just offered help. It had painted a target on itself. The distress call hadn't just been heard by allies. It had been heard by predators. And now those predators knew exactly where to find us. But no one on the street knew any of this. Not yet. The governments kept it quiet, hoping to buy time, hoping to prepare, hoping that the sleek black ship in orbit was a shield, not a lure. In homes and cafes and subway cars, life went on. People laughed, worried about bills, fell in love, argued about politics. They had no idea that the sky above them was no longer just sky, but a battlefield waiting to ignite. And the real monsters? They hadn't even shown their faces yet. The conquered ship stayed in orbit, silent and watchful. World leaders held emergency summits in underground bunkers. Engineers worked around the clock to understand alien tech. And deep in the oceans and forests, something ancient stirred. Something that had been sleeping for millions of years. But that's another part of the story. For now, all anyone could do was wait. And wonder what kind of help they'd really invited into their world. After that strange ship appeared in orbit, the world held its breath. But nothing happened. No invasion. No demands. Just silence from the sky. Governments scrambled to figure out what to do. Some wanted to shoot first and ask questions later. Others argued that this might be humanity's one chance to join something bigger than itself. In the end, they chose caution, but not isolation. A small team of scientists, linguists, and diplomats was quietly assembled. Their mission: make contact. It took weeks of careful signals, light pulses, and mathematical greetings before the ship responded. Then one quiet morning over the Pacific, a smaller vessel detached from the main craft and drifted toward the International Space Station, now mostly empty, used only for emergencies. Inside, astronauts waited, hearts pounding as the alien shuttle docked with a soft, almost gentle click. No weapons were drawn. No alarms blared. The visitors stepped out, tall, slender beings with smooth silver skin and large dark eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies. They moved slowly, respectfully, as if they knew how terrifying their presence must be. Through a mix of gestures, shared symbols, and AI-assisted translation, communication began. They called themselves envoys of the conquered, the same group that had sent the original distress call. They explained they weren't here to conquer. They were here to prepare. Earth's reply to their signal had been brave, they said, but it had also been loud. Too loud, like shouting in a dark forest full of hungry things. They warned of the Vorath, a species so ancient and ruthless that entire civilizations had vanished trying to fight them. The Vorath didn't just kill, they consumed. They stripped planets of all life, turned oceans into sludge, and repurposed organic matter into more of themselves. They were less like an army and more like a natural disaster with teeth. The envoys pleaded for Earth's help, not with weapons, but with space. They needed a place to gather their scattered fleets, a neutral ground to coordinate before the Vorath arrived. They asked for access to an old orbital platform, long abandoned but still functional. In return, they promised protection, knowledge, and a place among the stars. After tense debates behind closed doors, the world's major powers agreed. Not because they trusted the strangers, but because they feared what might happen if they said no. So the conquered moved in. Their ships, sleek, silent, and impossibly advanced, began arriving one by one, forming a loose ring around the moon. People on Earth saw them as tiny dots in the night sky, brighter than stars. Some called them guardian angels. Others called them a countdown clock. Life on the ground tried to go on. But you could feel the change. Kids stopped drawing rockets and started sketching black ships with glowing eyes. News channels ran quiet segments about unidentified high-orbit activity. Conspiracy. Theories exploded online, but even the wildest guesses couldn't match the truth. Then came the day everything shifted. It started with a flashover. Jakarta, not lightning, not a meteor. the sky just tore open. One moment it was a normal afternoon, humid and busy. The next, a jagged rip of violet light split the clouds like a wound in reality. From it poured shapes, twisted chitinous moving with a speed that defied physics. They hit the ground like falling knives, and within minutes entire city blocks were burning. Panic spread faster than the fires. Videos flooded the internet. Creatures the size of buses, covered in armored plates, dragging writhing tendrils that melted concrete on contact. They didn't speak. They didn't negotiate. They harvested. Trees, cars, people, everything organic was pulled apart and absorbed into pulsing sacks on their backs. It wasn't war. It was feeding. Military jets roared in within the hour. Missiles struck. Bullets flew. But the shells exploded against their hides like pebbles against steel. Worse, every explosion seemed to excite them. They moved faster, grew larger, split into smaller units. Within a day, Jakarta was gone. Not destroyed, but transformed. The ground pulsed with strange vines. The air smelled like burnt sugar and rust. And the sky kept opening in other places too. That's when the truth hit home. Earth hadn't just been found. It had been marked. The Concord's distress call, amplified by humanity's reply, had acted like a dinner bell across the galaxy. And the Vorath had come to eat. Back in orbit, the Concord ship scrambled. Energy beams lanced down from the sky, carving through Vorath swarms with terrifying precision. For a moment, hope flickered. Maybe the Alliance would hold. Maybe Earth wouldn't face this alone. But then something chilling happened. The Concorde stopped fighting. Their ships pulled back. Their beams went dark. Over secure channels, their envoys sent one final message. We cannot win here. The hive mind is too strong. We must regroup. Save yourselves if you can, and just like that, they vanished. One by one, their vessels blinked out of existence, jumping into whatever void lay between stars. They left behind scorched cities, broken armies, and a planet that had answered a call for help, only to be abandoned in its darkest hour. On the ground, people didn't cry. Not at first. They were too stunned, too angry. In refugee camps and underground shelters, the same question echoed. Why did we trust them? We opened our doors, shared our skies, and they used us as bait. But anger didn't stop the Vorath. They kept coming. Not just in Indonesia now, but off the coast of Madagascar, in the deserts of Australia, even near the Arctic Circle. Each rift brought more of them. Each hour they grew stronger, adapting to Earth's atmosphere, learning from every bullet fired at them. Governments tried to unite. Emergency broadcasts urged calm. Scientists worked non-stop, searching for weaknesses. Some tried sonic weapons. Others tested extreme cold. Nothing worked for long. The Vorath evolved faster than humans could react. Yet, in the chaos, something unexpected happened. People started helping each other, not just neighbors, but strangers across borders. Fishermen in the Philippines towed lifeboats full of refugees. Farmers in Brazil shared food with displaced families from the cities. In places where the internet still worked, hackers built early warning networks using old satellites. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough. But it was human, and maybe, just maybe, that was the one thing the Vorath didn't understand. Because while they saw Earth as a meal, humanity was beginning to see itself as something else. Not just a planet, but a home worth defending. Together, no one knew if they'd survive. But for the first time since the sky tore open, people stopped waiting for saviors from the stars. They started looking to each other. And deep beneath the oceans, in places no human had ever reached, something else began to stir. Something that had been sleeping since before there were cities, before there were words. It felt the Vorath's hunger. And it didn't like it, but that was still a secret the Earth kept to itself. The sky didn't just crack once, it kept breaking. After Jakarta fell, new rifts opened like wounds across the planet. One tore through the skies above the Indian Ocean, raining down creatures that swam through air like eels through water. Another split the clouds over the Amazon, and within hours the rainforest began to change. Trees twisted into spirals, rivers ran black, and animals either fled or vanished entirely. The Vorath weren't just invading, they were rewriting the world. People on the ground had no time to process what was happening. One day you were making coffee, checking messages, maybe worrying about rent. The next you were running down a highway with a backpack full of canned food, watching the horizon glow in unnatural purple. Cities emptied faster than anyone thought possible. Governments tried to organize evacuations, but roads jammed, power grids failed, and communication collapsed in waves. Radios became lifelines. Battery-powered speakers in town squares played emergency updates that grew more desperate by the hour. Military bases became fortresses. Soldiers dug trenches not with shovels but with bulldozers and plasma cutters salvaged from old labs. They learned fast. Bullets didn't work, but focused microwave bursts could stun the smaller Vorath long enough to trap them in concrete shells. Fire helped too, not regular fire but superheated plasma from repurposed industrial cutters. It didn't kill them, but it slowed them down. Every second counted. In Europe, scientists turned particle accelerators into makeshift weapons. Buried deep underground, machines once used to study the tiniest pieces of matter were reprogrammed to fire concentrated energy pulses into the sky. The first test over the Mediterranean lit up the night like a second sun, and for a few glorious minutes it sealed a rift shut. Hope flickered again. Maybe Earth didn't need aliens. Maybe humans could fight back with what they already had. But the Vorath adapted. Fast. Within days they started shielding themselves, growing thick, crystalline plates that deflected energy beams. They learned to avoid open fields, sticking to forests and cities where their numbers gave them cover. Worst of all, they began using human tech against them. Abandoned tanks were dragged into nests. Drones were ripped apart and rebuilt into buzzing scouts that hunted survivors by body heat. It was like watching a nightmare learn how to think, and then came the matriarch. No one saw it coming. One moment, the rift over the southern Pacific was spitting out the usual swarm. The next, the ocean itself seemed to rise. A shape emerged, so massive it blocked out the moon. It wasn't just big. It was wrong. Its body pulsed with veins of glowing blue fluid, and its limbs moved with a grace that made your stomach turn. It didn't walk. It unfolded, like a flower made of teeth and shadow. This wasn't another soldier. This was the heart of the hive. As it touched land near the coast of Chile, the ground trembled. Not from its weight, but from something deeper. Within hours, the soil began to shift. Grass turned gray. Rivers thickened into syrup. The air grew heavy, hard to breathe. Scientists monitoring from a bunker in Patagonia realized the truth. The matriarch wasn't just fighting. It was terraforming. Turning Earth into a nursery for more Vorath. Panic reached a new level. Even hardened soldiers whispered prayers. Families clung to each other in basements, listening to the distant screech of the hive mind echoing through the wind. Some gave up. Others got angrier. In remote villages, people started building barricades from scrap metal and old shipping containers. In mountain towns, hunters used thermal scopes to pick off scouts before they could call the swarm. It wasn't war like in the history books. It was survival, raw and messy and full of mistakes. But humanity wasn't helpless. In Russia, engineers jury-rigged old nuclear subs to carry experimental warheads. Devices that didn't explode with fire, but with a burst of destabilizing energy designed to collapse rifts from the inside. In the U.S., a team of former aerospace workers converted decommissioned space rockets into orbital strike platforms. They called it Project Last Light. The idea was simple. If the Vorath came through tears in reality, maybe you could stitch those tears shut, with force. The first launch failed. The second exploded on the pad. But the third made it. As the rocket arced over the Pacific, aimed at the heart of the matriarch's rift, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. Millions watched on cracked phone screens, in shelters, in caves, anywhere a signal still reached. When the warhead detonated, it didn't make a sound at first, just a blinding white sphere that swallowed the sky. Then came the shockwave, rolling across the ocean, flattening trees, shattering windows hundreds of miles away. For a moment, the rift flickered. The matriarch shrieked, a sound that broke eardrums and sent birds falling from the sky. The rift began to close, but it wasn't enough. From the collapsing tear, something else pushed through. Not another swarm, not another beast, but a seed. A pulsing, fist-sized orb of black matter that hit the water and sank instantly. Within minutes, sonar picked it up, moving fast toward the deepest part of the ocean. No one knew what it was, but everyone knew it was bad. Back in the command centers, exhausted leaders stared at maps now dotted with red zones, places where the Vorath had taken root. Food was running low. Medicine was almost gone. And the conquered? Still silent. No ships, no signals. Just empty sky where allies used to be. Yet in the quiet moments between attacks, something strange started happening. People began reporting odd movements in the deep ocean. Not Vorath, something older. Fishermen told stories of lights moving under the waves, lights that didn't blink, didn't drift, but pursued. Submarine crews picked up low-frequency pulses that didn't match any known animal, and in places where the Vorath tried to spread near coastlines, their advance suddenly stopped, as if something beneath the water was pushing back. No one understood it. But for the first time in weeks, someone dared to whisper, "Maybe we're not alone on our own planet." The Vorath had come from the stars, thinking Earth was an easy meal. But they didn't know what slept in the dark places, the trenches, the caves, the frozen poles. They didn't know Earth had its own guardians, ones that didn't need spaceships or radios, ones that had been here since before the first fish crawled onto land. And now, as the matriarch began to rebuild its rift over the Andes, those ancient things were waking up, not to save humanity, but because the Vorath had made one terrible mistake. They'd disturbed the wrong world. After the conquered vanished and the Vorath kept spreading, the world reached a breaking point. Cities were gone. Farmlands were poisoned. Millions were dead or missing. The few remaining governments huddled in bunkers arguing over one last terrible choice. Should they trigger a global nuclear winter to stop the Vorath once and for all? The idea wasn't to win a war. It was to make Earth worthless as a feeding ground. By launching enough warheads into the upper atmosphere, they could block out the sun for years. Crops would fail. Temperatures would crash. The planet would become a frozen wasteland. The Vorath, dependent on living biomass, might starve or leave. But so would most humans. It was a suicide note wrapped in strategy. People on the ground didn't know about the plan at first. But rumors spread fast. In refugee camps, in subway tunnels, in mountain hideouts, folks whispered about the final switch. Some said it was already loaded into silos. Others said it was just fear talking. But you could feel it in the air, the sense that time was running out. Then, just as leaders prepared to vote on the option, something unexpected happened, not from the sky, but from the sea, deep beneath the Pacific. Near the Mariana Trench, sensors picked up movement. Not ships, not submarines. Something massive, something alive. The signals were unlike anything ever recorded. Low-frequency pulses that vibrated through the ocean floor, followed by sudden temperature spikes and strange magnetic shifts. At first, scientists thought it was a volcanic event, but then the Vorath near the Philippines stopped advancing. Entire swarms froze, as if listening. Then they retreated, fast. That had never happened before. Within days, similar events occurred near every coastline where the Vorath had taken root. Off the coast of Norway, a rift flickered and collapsed on its own. In the Indian Ocean, Vorath scouts were found torn apart, not by weapons, but by something with crushing force and razor-sharp edges. And then came the night the ocean lit up. Fishermen in Indonesia reported it first. A soft blue glow spreading under the waves, miles wide, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then from the depths shapes rose, colossal, smooth, and covered in patterns that shimmered like starlight. They weren't mechanical. They weren't alien. They moved with a grace that felt ancient, deliberate, almost protective. These weren't invaders. They were Earth's own. Scientists later called them Leviathans, though no one knew what they truly were. Some thought they were descendants of prehistoric life that had evolved in total darkness, shielded from extinction by the ocean's depths. Others believed they were something older than evolution itself, guardians encoded into the planet's very biology, waiting for a threat too great for humans to handle alone. Whatever they were, they didn't hesitate. When the Vorath matriarch began converting the Amazon into a hive nursery, one of the Leviathans surfaced in the Atlantic and let out a sound. A deep, resonant tone that traveled through water and ground alike. The effect was instant. Vorath across South America convulsed. Their bioluminescent veins dimmed. Their movement slowed as if their very cells were being disrupted. Then the Leviathans attacked, not with fire or missiles, but with energy fields that unraveled the Vorath's molecular structure. Where they passed, the twisted forests began to heal. The black rivers cleared. Even the air felt cleaner, lighter. The matriarch, sensing the threat, tried to flee, but a second Leviathan rose from the Caribbean, blocking its path. What followed wasn't a battle in the human sense. It was more like a storm meeting a mountain. The matriarch shrieked, lashing out with plasma tendrils, but the Leviathan absorbed the energy and redirected it, turning the Vorath's own power against it. Within hours, the matriarch was gone, torn apart, dissolved, erased. The rifts began to seal on their own. The sky stopped tearing. For the first time in months, the stars were visible again, unchanged, distant and quiet. On the ground, people didn't cheer. They cried. They hugged strangers. They fell to their knees in the mud and thanked the ocean, the earth, the sky, anything that would listen. No one understood how or why these creatures had awakened, but everyone felt it. Earth had fought back. In the weeks that followed, the Leviathans didn't stay. One by one, they sank back into the deep, their glowing forms fading into the dark water. They left no messages, no demands. Just peace. The nuclear option was canceled. The warheads were powered down. Humanity, battered but alive, began the long work of rebuilding, not with grand plans or alien tech, but with shovels, seeds, and shared meals around campfires. The conquered never returned. No signal came from Vega. No apology, no explanation. Maybe they were still fighting their own war. Maybe they were ashamed. Or maybe they'd simply written Earth off as lost and were shocked to find it still breathing. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that people had learned something important. They weren't just passengers on this planet. They were part of it. And Earth, it turned out, had its own way of protecting its children. In the ruins of old cities, new gardens sprouted. In schools rebuilt from scrap wood, kids drew pictures not of spaceships or monsters, but of glowing whales rising from the sea. Scientists studied the few biological traces the Leviathans left behind, not to weaponize them, but to understand. To listen. And at night, when the world was quiet, some swore they could still feel it. The deep, slow pulse from the ocean. A reminder that the planet was watching, that it remembered, and that it would rise again. If ever needed, the stars stayed silent. But the Earth had finally spoken. The silence after the storm was the loudest sound anyone had ever heard. For months, the world had been filled with screams, explosions, the unnatural shriek of rifts tearing open, and the wet, clicking hunger of the Vorath. Now all that was gone. The sky was just sky again. No glowing tears, no alien ships, no falling fire. The oceans calmed. The forests, though scarred, began to breathe. And in the quiet, people did something they hadn't done in a long time. They stopped running. But peace didn't feel like victory. It felt fragile, like a single match in a dark room. Everyone knew the Vorath were gone, but no one knew if they were really gone for good. What if another rift opened tomorrow? What if the conquered came back, not as allies, but as conquerors? What if the Leviathans never woke again? So humanity didn't celebrate. It listened. Scientists set up new monitoring stations, not just in space, but deep underground and under the sea. They didn't just watch the stars anymore. They listened to the planet itself. Seismographs picked up faint vibrations from the ocean floor. Hydrophones recorded low, rhythmic pulses that matched no known creature. Some called it the Earth's heartbeat. Others called it a warning. Either way, no one ignored it. In towns and villages, life returned in small, stubborn ways. A bakery reopened in what was left of Lisbon, using solar ovens and flour ground by hand. In the highlands of Kenya, farmers planted seeds saved in underground vaults, watching green shoots push through ash-covered soil. Kids played soccer in fields that had once been battle zones, their laughter echoing where screams used to live. But the biggest change wasn't in what people did, it was in how they saw themselves. Before the rifts opened, Earth felt like a stage where humans were the only actors. Now they knew they weren't alone, not just in the universe, but on their own world. The Leviathans hadn't saved them out of kindness. They'd acted because Earth itself was under threat. That meant humanity wasn't the owner of this planet. They were part of its story, just one thread in a much older, deeper tapestry. That idea changed everything. Nations stopped hoarding resources. Old borders meant less when survival depended on sharing. Engineers from rival countries worked together to rebuild power grids using clean, quiet energy. No more fossil fuels, no more weapons-grade tech. Why risk angering the planet again? Why invite more attention from the stars? Schools taught new lessons. Not just math and history, but ecology, deep-sea biology, and cosmic awareness. Children learned that the universe was vast, beautiful, and dangerous, and that shouting into it without thinking could bring more than friends. They also learned that Earth had secrets older than cities, older than language, and that those secrets had saved them when no one else would. The Concorde never returned. No signal came from Vega. No apology, no explanation. Some believed they'd been destroyed in their own war. Others thought they were watching from afar, ashamed or afraid. But over time, people stopped waiting for them. They'd answered a call for help and been left behind. That hurt, but it also taught them something valuable. They couldn't rely on saviors from the sky. Their strength had to come from here, from home, and home, it turned out, was more alive than anyone had ever imagined. Years passed. Cities rose again, but differently. No more glass towers scraping the clouds. New buildings were low, green, built to blend with the land, not dominate it. Rooftops grew food. Streets were shared by people, animals, and wild plants. Energy came from the sun, the wind, even the slow heat of the Earth's core. It wasn't perfect. Mistakes were made. But every choice was weighed with one question in mind. Will this honor the planet that saved us? At night, people still looked up at the stars, but not with hope for rescue. With caution. With respect. They knew now that the universe wasn't just empty space waiting to be filled. It was full of things. Some kind, some hungry, some beyond understanding. And Earth was rare, precious, protected. No one ever saw a Leviathan again, but sometimes on calm nights near the coast, fishermen would turn off their engines and just float, and if they were very still, they'd feel it, a deep vibration through the hull like a giant breathing far below. They'd nod, whisper a thanks, and sail home. Scientists never found proof the Leviathans were intelligent in the human way. But they didn't need to. Intelligence wasn't just about building radios or writing equations. Sometimes it was about knowing when to rise, and when to let the world heal on its own. The last rift had closed over a decade ago. Yet every year on the anniversary, people gathered, not to mourn but to remember. They lit lanterns made of recycled paper and set them floating on rivers and seas, not as a signal to the stars but as an offering to the deep, a promise when we're still here. We're trying. And in the quiet moments between songs and stories, if you listened closely, you could almost hear the planet sigh softly, slowly, like a parent watching a child finally learn to walk on their own. The aliens had called for help. Humanity had answered. Then the real beast showed up, not from the stars, but from the soul of the world itself. And in the end, it wasn't technology or weapons that saved them. It was balance. It was humility. It was the quiet, ancient power of a living planet that refused to be devoured. Now when children asked, "Are we alone?" the answer wasn't about aliens or signals from space. It was simpler, "No, we've never been alone. The Earth has always been with us, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough."